Welcome to Net Impact, the podcast that demystifies and explores the influence of cybersecurity and cybercrime across the world and into our lives. Brought to you by ThriveDX, the global leader in cybersecurity training. Here's your host and guide to the digital world, Fred Menachem.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Net Impact. So I'm your host, Fred Menachem, and I'm pretty excited about today. So we have an exciting guest, and what's so special about today, he's a longtime friend. He's currently the state attorney of Palm Beach County, Florida. His name is Dave Aronberg, and I'm going to give him a much better introduction in a moment because this guy's really special to me, and you'll hear why. But before we jump into that, I wanted to take a moment. It's kind of a sad day in a sense, and, I'm sure a lot of you folks listening know who U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman was, and he was a mentor of mine. I knew him well. He passed away, unfortunately, yesterday. And, the craziest thing, he was on TV a week and a half ago. Dave and I were just talking before the show that he was so healthy. And, it tells us life is so fragile. But apparently he fell. And, at 82 years old, you don't know. And unfortunately, he passed away. And it's a sad day. Now, the reason why Joe is special for a lot of reasons. But this is a cybersecurity podcast. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. He was... And David knows this as well. He was so ahead of his time. He focused and recognized cybersecurity and, for national security infrastructure protection way before anybody was even talking about it. I mean, I'm talking about back to the 90s. And he was one of the earliest advocates. Now, think about it. He passed away at 82 years old, and he was one of the earliest advocates in the U.S. Senate for the need to protect our critical infrastructure and from cyber threats. And literally, he started in the late 90s and the early 2000s when nobody was talking cyber. They didn't even understand. And, he co-sponsored the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. And that bill sought to enhance the security of our nation's critical infrastructure by promoting the sharing of cybersecurity threat information between the government and private sector. He was a strong advocate for the creation of a centralized federal authority to coordinate cybersecurity efforts. And he argued for the appointment of a cybersecurity coordinator to oversee the protection of America's digital infrastructure. Now, I want to talk for a moment about my feelings about him, but think about that for a moment. The folks here that are listening, a lot of you folks, some are learning about cyber, but a lot of you folks know about cyber. For a man, his time to be talking about cybersecurity at a time when nobody else was, showed how far advanced he was in his thinking. He was very special to me because, like Joe Lieberman and like my guest today, David Aronberg, we're moderate guys. We've always believed in working with folks on both sides of the aisle, putting America first, and I think unfortunately in today's divisive environment, you don't see that so often. And, Joe was a good person. He recognized the importance of national security, and he focused on that. He was high level. He understood the nuances of protecting the country, but he also understood the nuances of working together and doing what was best for the American people. And he was a special man. I had the chance to spend a lot of time with him over the years, and his wife Hadassah, of course, who was, who's his widow at this point, in her own right, a brilliant woman, and they contributed so much to the fabric of this nation. And I'm honored that I had the chance. All of these years. We also lost Bill Richardson, another mentor of mine, not so long ago. And I'm so honored that I had the chance to spend time with him and learn from him. And, unfortunately, he's the last of a dying breed and folks in our country who really, it seems like, focused on America first. I will say this, and before we move on to Dave, so my mother, who they had dinner, Joe Lieberman and Hadassah on occasion for Shabbat, which is a Friday night thing for the Jewish community, or a holiday. And, my mother just sent me a message, and I'm not going to get into the story now. She's like, he ate my chocolate cake. And it's a funny story I'll get into later, but he was a smart guy, a brilliant guy with a dry wit and sense of humor, and he will be missed. And I just wanted to say it's a loss for America and real sad to have heard the news. But on that note, I want to kind of move on to something a little bit more on a less of a somber tone, and that's to introduce my friend, Dave Aronberg. And I'll tell you a story a bit. He's not just my friend, which we found out recently, but Dave has a lot of accolades. I might embarrass him here a little bit. And are you turning red, Dave? You still okay? I have the capacity to do that to Dave, to a lot of people. But Dave graduated with honors from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and he's done so much in his life, so much good for the community, for the nation, for our state. So he's a former assistant attorney general, former Florida state senator. He served in 2 presidential administrations. He was a White House fellow as the role of special assistant to the Secretary of the Treasury, where he had focused on international money laundering. As state attorney, currently he leads a team of 115 prosecutors. And, in this role, he's on corrupt drug treatments. He could, because of Dave, there was a 14% drop in opioid caused deaths in Palm Beach County in 2021. He took down the pill mills, the pain clinics that were out there, just like giving out medication. We all know about the opioid crisis. And, Dave didn't mess around, and he took an industry that was hurting folks. And he is not solely, but significantly responsible for being the leader in this nation to make a difference and take down the things that were actually hurting folks that were trying to get their lives together. And, I'm very proud of him for that. And it's always an issue I've advocated for, as well, as he knows. Now, the last thing I'll say is that Dave is a media hound, man, in the best way possible. I told folks that he was on air today. No, in a good way, Dave.
Not a good way.
Yeah, no, a good way. In a very good way. You have a lot to contribute. In fact, I mentioned to somebody I know well, and they're not even political, and they're like, "Oh my God, I saw Dave the other day. I loved what he had to say." And your analysis on TV, the way that you break down cases, it makes everybody who doesn't necessarily understand the legal system really understand what's at stake. So you're a legal commentator on radio, on cable news. You're on Morning Joe regularly. And all right, on that note, I'm so proud to have you here. And Dave, great to see you, by the way.
Fred, it's great to be back with you, man. Thanks for having me on your show.
Of course, man. I'm so excited. This is our second show only. And I said, I got to bring such a special guy, a guy so important to me. And so how did Dave and I know each other? I'll just be brief, but Dave and I met about 30 years ago, 1995, I believe. We were it was after a congressional election. I'll leave nameless, but we were on a yacht, right? Celebrating. It was, not our yacht, unfortunately, but we were invited to, we were invited there. I never met Dave, and we were sitting on this yacht, and we thought we were pretty cool. We're just young kids, but we were in the heart of politics, and we got to know each other. And that was 1995. And for all these years, we've worked together in different ways, not directly, but we've worked in, advocated for similar issues. We've generally been on the same side of issues. I think we both share the same philosophies, and he's been a friend. So about 2014, probably, I had a radio show called The Gray Zone in Miami, and Dave was a regular guest, and so one day I get a call from an aunt I didn't know, and she's like, we were talking back and forth about a family tree, and she said, "Fred, how's your cousin?" I said, "Huh?" She's like, "The state attorney, Palm Beach County." I start laughing. I'm like, "Well, he's my dear friend. Well, what are you talking about?" She's like, "Well, he's your third cousin." So apparently his great-grandmother, Leah, was the sister of my great-grandmother, Rose. Now, how does that happen? Somebody your friend for 30 years ends up being your cousin. So that's the story. We're cousins now, and I guess we're blood, man, which is kind of scary. So on that note, I mean, he's so much smarter than I am. On that note, I want to start with, we're here to talk about cyber, but there were some big cases you were involved with. There's been a lot of big cases, but, of course, the Corey Lewandowski case, the clown killer case, and Miss Cleo, which you prosecuted Miss Cleo, plus you were on the documentary. So why don't you give us like a 5-minute tell us about those cases.
Well, I'll be briefer than that, because as far as Miss Cleo, that was the Jamaican Shango shaman psychic who is neither Jamaican nor a Shango shaman psychic. She was on late night TV commercials. And I was an assistant attorney general in the economic crime division, but the economic crime division was a bit of a misnomer. It was a civil division. We went after consumer fraud. And so I used to watch these late night TV commercials and be like, wow, someone should do something about this. This is obviously a scam. And then I said, well, maybe it should be me. I mean, it's sort of my job. I was a new assistant attorney general, and I just decided, let's do it. Send out. I looked into it and then found out that the attorney general, the boss, Bob Butterworth, had wanted to go after this company. They actually were based in Fort Lauderdale in our backyard. That was where I was working, out of Fort Lauderdale. And the attorney general used to see the attorney general in Missouri at these national conferences, and the AG in Missouri used to needle him to say, hey, Butterworth, what's wrong with you guys? Why are we the ones going after this scam and not you? And Butterworth is was such an amazing guy. He was very buttoned down, very reserved, right? The
amazing guy,
full of integrity, and he just never let anything, at least outwardly, get under his skin. But he would boil inside as this guy would be joshing him, and then so he was only too eager for me to be like, yeah, I want to take these guys down, and I sent out some subpoenas, and what I found out was this was a scam that preyed upon the lonely, the desperate, and charged them, $4.99 a minute to make these phone calls. And if these so-called psychics who were trained as just telemarketers, who were not psychics, there were ads for telemarketers. They would give you a script and they would just incentivize you to keep callers on the phone for at least 20 minutes. And if you didn't, you got docked. So this was a big scam. What we found, though, is there were collection letters sent out to people who, so people would call and say, hey, we got this bill from this psychic hotline. I have a 12-year-old who obviously made these calls. It's supposed to be 18 over. Please remove this from our bill. AT&T or Bell South, whatever the company, Ma Bell at the time, removed it. And then this company would continue to pursue it. And the collection letters were signed by Miss Cleo. So that was our hook to get her and drag her in the lawsuit. So I was not the first one to go after Psychic Readers Network. I was the first one to include Miss Cleo in that effort. And that's what made it a big deal. And that's what led 20, 30 years later to the documentary on HBO. People should watch it. I think it's well done. It's called Call Me Miss Cleo.
Right. And you were in that documentary, right?
That's why I'm plugging it. Yeah, I was in it.
Right. Yeah, of course.
I was in it a lot. And, it was a very sympathetic documentary to Miss Cleo. But with that said, I thought they were very fair to me. And I think it's actually pretty compelling TV. And Miss Cleo passed away a few years ago from cancer. She, after what happened, we shut down the company. Well, we worked with the feds, and together the feds came in. The company was shut down. They had to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars. And Miss Cleo turned out she was just an employee of the company. She wasn't part of it, so we eventually dropped her from the lawsuit. But she continued to do things like weddings, and I don't know if she did bar mitzvahs, but
she weddings and bar mitzvahs. Okay, well that right. She got the whole gamut.
Yeah.
What about
she became an LGBTQ activist and was the grand marshal of the Gay Pride Parade in Fort Worth a few years ago before she passed.
And I say why? Because Florida. I mean, it never fails, right? The craziness of this state. That's another podcast that we can do later. But it's amazing. You have been involved. Look, you're an incredible state attorney. You've won a lot of cases, but it's amazing the characters that we have in this community, and Palm Beach County is no different. So I'd like to shift over to the reason we are having this podcast is cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny you talk about Miss Cleo because those bills that they were sending out, right? Now, my understanding, Dave, tell me if I'm wrong, those bills were not always people that actually even made calls, right?
Right. You had minors, but you also had people who inherited phone numbers. So if you had a phone number that someone previously had made the calls, this company would come after you for it and send you collection letters. And that was part of the scam, was that they knew but they were trying to get as many people as possible to send them money, whether you made the calls or not, whether you were eligible to make the calls or not. And the underlying business was a scam because, they would have these commercials, and Miss Cleo had a lot of charisma, and she would say, call me now. We're for real. We're for real, real psychics. But in small print at the bottom, it would say for entertainment only. And that was a way of saying we're lying, but that's not what they were saying. It reminds me if you, this was actually, I brought this up, in the civil fraud case in New York for Trump, where he was saying that, hey, we put disclaimers on our financial disclosures. So you can't trust us with the information we're providing, but that's not what you're doing. You were doing essentially what Ms. Cleo was doing for entertainment only. It's like these opaque, vague disclaimers. If you really want to give a good disclaimer that'll protect you, say, we're not for real. Our psychics are not real. That would be okay. So same thing with Trump. It would say, hey, don't trust our numbers. We're making it up. That would be okay, but that's not what they did.
And so I bring that up, though, for a reason. Now, if you think about something, and I want to get into a Supreme Court case, but prior to that, if you think about something, today's world, and Dave, you've been involved with identity, prosecuting identity theft. Now, those things that Ms. Cleo was doing, it might not yet have been on the level of cybersecurity hacking, but the reality is what was happening was sort of the predecessor to what we see now, right? I get bills regularly from fake PayPal scams. Why? Because my information is on the dark web.
Good point.
So the reason I bring that up is that really that was the beginning of fake billing. Now with the advancements in technology and the ability to, and people giving all their information away for free, which always surprises me that people are so willing to do that. Now that stuff's available on the web and on the dark web. So what that means is that if you have somebody like Miss Cleo, the amount of money that somebody could pull very quickly before, you even get a chance to prosecute them is a scary situation. And that's kind of where we are in this country. And a lot of people will pay now because they don't realize it. So I do want to move on to a recent Supreme Court case. There's a lot going on now in the country that relates to cybersecurity. So the Supreme Court recently heard a case that was against the Biden administration, which looks like they're actually going to lean the other way in support of it, which claimed that the federal government's attempt to curb disinformation online was curbing individuals' free speech. Now, why does this matter for cybersecurity? Because information warfare is part of our national security, right? And you talk about election meddling and on and on. And in 2023, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned an injunction limiting government agencies like CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, from communicating with social media platforms. Now, this case, and the Supreme Court is actually leaning away that people weren't sure it would. This case has far-reaching ramifications for individuals, for how the internet works, for law enforcement agencies, and for the government's ability to fight malicious cyber actors. So, I mean, I say, Dave, where do you fall on the case? But from an assessment perspective, how do you feel about all of this? And then what do you think the danger is? Because we see where the Supreme Court is going. I mean, it looks like whether it's liberal, Supreme, conservative, they're all going in a similar direction.
This whole case was brought because of politics. You had a couple of Republican attorneys general who wanted to find a right-wing judge who would then limit the Biden administration's ability to get involved with social media. Like, what they wanted to do was to stop the Biden administration from communicating with social media, leaning on social media, so that they don't issue alerts saying, hey, there's Russian hacking, there's the stuff you're putting out is misinformation on vaccines, on election fraud. And you have these right-wing attorneys general who did what's called forum shopping or judge shopping. And they found a judge in a satellite courthouse in, I believe it was Louisiana. It was in Louisiana, where they knew there was only one federal judge in that courthouse. Now, normally, when you file a federal lawsuit, you go into a federal district court and it gets randomly assigned to one of the several judges there. But if you file it in a court, in a satellite courthouse where there's only one judge, the judge you're going to get. Right. Because it's in a rural area. This was a very red area with a very conservative judge appointed by Donald Trump. And they got everything they wanted. They got this judge to issue a nationwide ban on the ability of the Biden administration to communicate with social media providers to limit misinformation. Appalling. Right. And the Fifth Circuit, which is a right-wing circuit, wouldn't go that far, and now it's at the court. And the court is sorry. Yeah. The Supreme Court's not going to allow it either. And it was so egregious what these attorneys general did that not only is the Supreme Court going to repudiate it and allow the Biden administration and future administrations to communicate, as long as you don't try to extort, or I forgot the term they use. They can't coerce. You can't coerce social media companies. Do it or else. You have to, but you can communicate with them, of course. But this was so appalling that not only will the Supreme Court allow it, but Chief Justice Roberts has now changed the system so that you cannot forum shop anymore. That no longer are you able to go to a satellite courthouse and pick the judge you want for something like this. And this is not the only time you've seen it. You also saw this with the abortion drug. I can never pronounce the correct name, metafestone or something. The abortion drug. It was the same thing. They found their conservative judge who then issued a nationwide ruling. Chief Justice Roberts said, no more. We're not going to let people do this anymore.
And Roberts, look, that's what I was saying, taking politics out of it, because, I'm trying to, the cybersecurity podcast, but taking politics out of it, Roberts is a conservative member of the court. I mean, a moderate. And what you're talking about is, you have all the justices sort of falling on the side of It's not. There's not dissension so much in the Supreme Court.
Yes, I know you want to make sure people know we're not being political. It's not political. The Supreme Court is
right.
It's 3 conservative majority.
Right.
So it's not like they're doing the liberals bidding on it. And Justice Roberts, appointed by George W. Bush, a conservative.
Exactly.
Yes, you could say he's less extreme than some of the others, but he's still a conservative Republican. And he just sees that this is not fair play. I mean, who agrees? No one could agree with that. You're supposed to have a system where you go into the random hopper and get a judge. You're not supposed to be able to choose what judge you want.
Well,
and then in a small district, get a nationwide ban on something like communicating with social media companies. No matter where you stand on it, that's not the way the system is supposed to work.
You know, Dave, it reminds me of I was once driving, too fast, and I was driving through Talladega. I was probably driving 100 miles per hour, and I get pulled over. Sheriff comes walking out of the car, big cowboy hat. He's got his boots on. I'm like, what's about to happen? He comes over. He goes, son? I said, yes, sir. He says, you've been driving 100 miles an hour. I said, but sir, I'm in Talladega. I thought that was okay. We're NASCAR Talladega, right? So he told me, I said, listen, I work in politics. I try to pull off what I pull off, Fred Menachem style. And he says, I'm not kidding. He says, just call the judge and work it out with him. I'm telling you, true story. It's like a one-horse town. I called the judge and I worked it out. But that was, kind of reminds me of the story of, one judge courthouse.
Was he the judge? Because that reminds me of
he was, right.
That reminds me of the movie Doc Hollywood. You just gave plot for the Michael J. Fox movie Doc Hollywood. I haven't thought about that movie in like 30 years, but that was the whole plot, right? He ran into a fence and the victim was also the judge who had ordered him to stay in the town and to be the doctor. And then he fell in love and he wanted to live there forever.
I'm telling you, I knew this was going to happen. We're here to talk cyber. I knew this was going to happen with Dave and I, but that's okay. This is, I'm so excited to do this. So back to the case, and I want to get into SolarWinds, but taking because we see, look, at the end of the day, you see all the Supreme Court justices, which is very rare, sort of falling on the same end, from the most liberal to the most conservative. That tells you something. And by the way, that's great to see, at least that they can work together. I mean, it's few and far between, but do you think that, seriously, so you look at this case and take the legal ramifications out of it, and we look at our Constitution, and I think this is where the complications come from, right? How do you manage free speech? I mean, the world has changed, and they keep misinformation, disinformation. How do you do it? And there might not be an answer, but that's my question, Dave. How do we balance national security concerns and our battle against cyber criminals and against our First Amendment rights? I mean, you may not have an answer, but what the heck do we do here, buddy?
I mean, that's a huge existential question. How do you balance? Well, we have a Constitution, which makes it a little harder, but that's what we signed up for. We have a First Amendment, and you have foreign actors like Putin who will exploit that. They tried to hurt us in other ways, to do a military arms race, threaten us with missiles in Cuba. But ultimately, I think he settled on the fact that with the new technologies and the internet, that he could try to destroy us from within through the spread of misinformation, to try to rile people up. You see some of these extremist accounts on both the far left and the far right, but that's a tougher thing. In the meantime, we need good cybersecurity, where the government can step in when you see the cyber extortion cases going on, and you have all these international gangs that are hacking, and instead of companies just rolling over and just paying, which just encourages more hacking, it's good if they work with the FBI, and then we can start taking down these international gangs. And even if they're in countries where we can't touch them, like Iran and Russia, there are things that we can do in response. The same kind of stuff that they do, we could do it a lot better than they can. So, you need to be tough, just like it's warfare. This is cyber warfare. And, you have to realize this is something that is not theoretical. It's happening now. And God forbid that they're able to hack into the water plant or, a water treatment plant or electric plant, and then it destroys our economy and puts lives at risk.
Exactly. 100%. You couldn't have said it better, actually. That was great. And you had a case not so long ago, not a case, but in your jurisdiction, Riviera Beach, I believe it happened, correct? Am I wrong? Didn't I read something about that happening?
Yeah, Riviera Beach was hacked. They had these cyber terrorists, and, they end up paying the ransom. And what does that do? That encourages more cyber terrorism. So the problem is that, a lot of these places didn't have backups. And so I think now, but we're always fighting the last war. Once Once we
Right.
finally had the backups, now we're prepared for the next case. Now they're onto something else, and there's some new scam that victims are not aware of, and they fall prey to it. And all it takes is a low-level employee who just downloads
Easy.
the email from some suitor in France, and then it turns out to be
Dave, I right now, and I get a lot of those, and I'm always thinking, like, maybe it's a real suitor, but it never seems to work out that way. Unfortunately, yeah, I know. Right. Exactly. Maybe. I mean, Dave, you're always Dave is devilishly handsome, and for some reason I've gotten old, and we're the same age. I mean, pretty much. Yeah, I know. It's
Oh man, I think you're looking good actually, cuz I like like I can't rock the pocket square thing, the hanky. I just
no
something I've never been able to do. I don't know. My fiance would like me to do that.
Right.
She pick stuff out. I just don't know how to do it. It's not me. Maybe one day I'll learn.
Now, Dave's a bit buttoned up at times, but I've seen him looser too. I'll help you with that. I need to help you with ChatGPT and the handkerchief. I have my list going on. Exactly.
Two things.
So, right, let me tell you something. ChatGPT can be good and bad. I mean, it could also hack into, there's a lot of dangers to it, but I will tell you, I took Dave's bio and I said, hey, give me just bullet points of it. And then I went back and forth, a few times. I'll add this and that. And look, I did in 15 minutes what would have taken me, hours. And that's where, the efficiency comes in. But let's move on because we have a few things we want to cover here. So I want to get a bit into the SolarWinds case because that was a big case, and that was on October 30th. It was 2023, and this is, cyber's in everything, David. It's crazy hacking. Forget boots on the ground. This is just warfare everywhere. We're at risk. And so the Securities and Exchange Commission announced that it filed charges against SolarWinds Corp and its chief information security officer in connection with the SEC Division of Enforcement's investigation of a cyber attack. Now, the complaint alleged that the company defrauded SolarWinds investors and customers because, they kept information away from their shareholders and the public through misstatements, through omissions, through schemes that concealed both the company's poor cybersecurity practices and its heightened and increasing cybersecurity risks. So this was the first lawsuit, like I think in the history, and this is why we're still in the Wild West, where it's kind of like the rehab business when you was the Wild West, right? And they're finally clamping down like you did on sober homes and the pill mills, but where the SEC brought cybersecurity enforcement claims against an individual. So, I want to ask you, Dave, as a brilliant legal mind and somebody that's been in the public eye, fighting the good fight for so long. What risks are there for companies with reporting or not reporting cyber attacks? And you think we're going to be seeing more cases like this brought forward?
When I was in the state Senate, I had an early bill that I sponsored that was a carrot and stick approach with businesses. It encouraged businesses to come forward and to acknowledge when there's been a hacking. And if they didn't, they could get hit with fines and lawsuits. But if they would come forward, there's like a safe harbor. And I think that's the right way to do it. You want to incentivize businesses to acknowledge. And I get a lot of those emails. Hey, your information has been stolen. You should change your passwords now. And you're just used to that by now. But that's what needs to happen across the board because it's a responsibility of these businesses when they get our information and they say, we will not sell it to anyone. Well, when it's stolen, you have a responsibility to let people know, at least protect ourselves. And in many cases, it's we should be talking about required cybersecurity for those victims of hacking, where the businesses pay for the cybersecurity, a 1-year, subscription to one of these companies that protect your information. And I think that's the way to go. And a lot of these laws exist at the state level. And, until I don't know what kind of laws are at the federal level, I'm not a federal official, but the states all need to come up with a law like that because that's the era we're living in. And the companies shouldn't just have to do it on their own volition where, hey, it's up to them voluntarily to inform customers that their entire financial lives are about to be destroyed. They need to let us know before something terrible happens, because after it happens, it's much harder to pick up the pieces afterwards.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, on the note that you're talking about, all this legislation that needs to happen and the way our system's set up, right? You have state, you have federal government. So the good thing about living in a democracy is that we get to debate these things, right? And we get to have these conversations. But the difficult thing about a democracy is that in places where there's authoritarian governments, right? Like are the bad actors, Iran, Russia, they can, and that's what always happens. That's why they can freaking hack crap faster than us. They can just say, hey, this is the regulation, and that's the end of the story.
Right.
And and I think really as a country, we're not going to, obviously we're going to, our system of government is, we're a free country and we want to continue that system. But I think that's where, we can struggle. And the bill you're talking about, I believe was the identity theft stuff. And you were saying when you were in the Senate, right? Or
I was brand new. No, I was a brand new senator. And that's when I sponsored this bill and the business committee worked with me on it. And I mean, that's the way to do it. You want to get buy-in from them. You don't want to bring them in screaming. And to get buy-in, you give them a safe harbor. You give them some incentives to come forward with the information. You want them to be rushing to tell you. Or else, if they don't, you want that they punish. That's the carrot and stick approach I was talking about.
Yeah. What year was that, by the way?
I think it was 2003. It was one of my first bills.
Wait, 2003? So Jeb was Governor Bush. I actually saw him the other day, and it's funny. He's a character, Jeb, right? He's that satire, and
I don't know.
Right?
Well, I knew him sort of, right. Sort of, yeah.
So I only asked that because I saw him the other day, and Jeb's interesting to me, and so I remember seeing him. It was like 2002, and he's got. I mean, you were in the Senate. He had this satire, right? He's a bit, he can be condescending. The first time I was like, "What's wrong with him?" But then I got to know him a bit. He told me. So it was when earpieces first came out. You remember those days? They were big. He's like, Fred, what's going on? Are you trying to get beamed up? I was like, so then the other day, I'm with Gene Prescott, the owner of the building. We're having lunch and Jeb comes over. And anyway, I'm joking with him. I'm like, Jeb, I helped you, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Do you remember this? He goes, I go, you probably don't remember. He goes, Fred, stop being so insecure. And anyway, I just thought it was funny. But
cool. Well, that's good. He remembers you. That's cool. And just a shout out to the Biltmore. Gene Prescott's a really good guy. The best pool in the world. To this day, I don't go down there enough. It's rare, but it's my favorite pool anywhere on the face of this earth.
Oh, and we have a national audience here. The thing is, for all you folks that wonder what we're talking about, the Biltmore Hotel is a guide. It's a national historical site. It's in Coral Gables. It is, I think, every president, every governor on all sides of the aisle, every politician's been hosted there, stayed there. There's the Al Capone suite. So if you do get here down to Miami, check out the Biltmore because it is a cool place. And by the way, we're gonna cut this clip. I'm sending it to Gene. By the way, I hope we get free rooms. Or
what about the pool, bro? Right. It's not your typical pool.
Oh, like the pool now.
It goes forever.
No, it's freaking gorgeous, right? I know.
No, it goes forever. You just it's like a mile long, pretty much. I've never seen anything like that.
I know, right? It's exactly. Well, I'm waiting for you and your fiance to come down here so we can hang out at the pool. I've been asking you to, maybe she can make some introductions, but I want to move over to the. And by the way, that was just a personal endorsement. I was kidding around, and so folks know it was just a joke. But it is a great hotel from Dave and I have personal experience. So I want to make clear that out there. So Apple antitrust case. Now this is there's a lot going on right now, man. So the Department of Justice, of course, for folks that don't know, has brought an antitrust lawsuit against Apple, and it cites iMessage's encryption and security features as anti-competitive. Now, if you have an Android, right, you can't, they don't work together, and I have an Android. But anyway, that's the DOJ's complaint also hones in on Apple's approach to security and privacy. So they argue that it uses those principles as an excuse for its anti-competitive practices. So it jettisons them whenever they might hurt the bottom line. So the complaint reads like this. In the end, Apple deploys privacy and security justifications as an elastic shield that can stretch or contract to serve Apple's financial and business interests, the company the complaint reads. So Dave Aronberg, how concerned should corporations be that cybersecurity is going to be playing a larger role in lawsuits like this?
Well, I keep thinking about how Apple and other companies are trying to prove that they will keep your information private. They will have ways to make sure no one can ever get into your phone unless you give them the password. And then law enforcement, if we need to get in, can't even do so, even if we have a warrant. And it's a problem. There was a case in San Bernardino with the terrorism where we needed to get into the terrorist's phone. they weren't even around anymore. And
Yeah.
you remember the law enforcement had to go because Apple refused to allow us to get in, even though law enforcement had a warrant. I say us. I'm using the royal us.
Right.
And in the end, the law enforcement had to find and pay an Israeli company, the only company that could do it, that was able to do it. But that doesn't seem to be, that seems to be wrong. I mean, look, either let law enforcement in with a warrant, or find some other workaround in cases of emergency, because otherwise, to force law enforcement to have to spend six figures on to a private company to do what you guys should let them do anyways, especially when there's a warrant, not before, I just think is counterproductive. And so here you have Apple, which is also taking that theory of we're going to make it so secure and private and using it as a way, as a sword to hurt competition, to allegedly commit antitrust violations. And so I have issues with it all around. I say this as an Apple owner, whereas you're an Android. I think when I see someone that green on the text messages, I'm like, oh, they may not get my message. It's going to be slowed down. And that's what Apple wants. I think that is anti-competitive, and I'm glad the DOJ is doing something about it.
And I think Apple was trying, and it hasn't worked, to push Android to go into to find a way, but they refuse to work with the platform. That's of course a way to sell more phones. But that's why, by the way, you have apps like Signal and WhatsApp, and getting into what you're saying. I mean, that's where the cyber, that's where concerns come in. On one hand, you need the encryption, right, from a cybersecurity perspective, protecting folks' personal information. But this is a much longer conversation. Another one about privacy concerns versus obviously protecting protecting our citizens from criminal behavior. And this is where the complications come in. But my question to you is, if the DOJ prevails, what do you think we can expect to happen to Apple and its ecosystem? I mean, there's a lot of ramifications there.
Well, it depends how they prevail. Do they prevail in court? And usually it's a settlement. If it's a settlement, Apple will do something small and be able to keep its huge market share, and it'll be something that may help a little bit at the margins. But now, if they go and they throw the hammer down and there's a big case that goes before a jury, that's when you see real change. But that would be years down the road. So I don't know where this is going, but the fact that there were allegations in a press conference, I think maybe then it can at least spur some change. I don't expect it to be major change, but I think anything that makes the market more competitive, I think, is a good thing.
And we're seeing the stock drop 10% yesterday.
Well, that'll get their attention.
Yeah.
And
that's it.
I'm hoping they address the first part of my answer, which is being able to work with law enforcement to help solve crimes, and especially when there's an emergency like a terrorism situation. They've made it so hard on law enforcement. Either we're going to be a country that cares about our security and our safety, or we're going to prize privacy more and just say, hey, the privacy of criminals is more important. Now, I say this, the irony of this is that there are so few areas of privacy left. So that's our last bastion, so that law enforcement can't get into your phones. Meanwhile, cameras are everywhere, right? You have geolocating everywhere, right? You have your phones pinging off of towers everywhere. But but this is different. But no. When law enforcement has a terrorist and needs to get in the phone, no, that's where we draw the line. Okay.
Right. And everybody always say, I read sometimes that people are like, oh my God, the CIA, the government has our information. But I'm like, guys, I always respond this way. I'm like, but you're giving your information away freely. And it's not Generation X like us. We're skeptical. Freely to corporations, to governments. I'm like, what's going on? But I'll tell you something, Dave, because you and I both, we're actually, we're privacy advocates, and we always were. We grew up in a similar mentality, but that's gone. In fact, I have 1984 behind me. George Orwell, he knew what was going to happen. And I reread it recently. And I said I would fight this fight, and I gave up because there's no win anymore. So you're right. Like, why can't they, of everything out there, if there's a freaking terrorist attack and we want to find somebody, that you'd actually have to fight Apple to keep people safe. But let's go on, because we have limited time, and that is definitely, when you come back, we're going to talk more about that. But I think that we should talk a bit about voting, man, because look, without getting so political, but voting increasingly, going through machines, right, controlled by software. I mean, how, and David, I don't know if you can even have an answer but how can we ensure elections are safe and secure from cyber terrorists or malicious state actors? I mean, we remember the Chads when we went to that, right? So now we're using machines. Like what the heck do we do, man? Is there, is there a solution?
Well, the machines should have a paper trail. That was something that we did here in Palm Beach County.
Right.
We wanted to ensure a paper trail. Plus, the machines aren't hooked up to the internet when they're tabulating the votes. Everything is done locally, and there are backups. And even if bad actors are able to infiltrate a system, elections are done at the county level, local, and that makes it a lot harder for Russia to change the results of an election when they have to go county to county in all these states. And the bigger the county, the more sophisticated the deterrences are. And yeah, could this happen? It's always possible, but we are on guard. I mean, you have not only local counties and states getting involved, you have the federal government. You have, in fact, Chris Krebs, remember, he was Donald Trump's cybersecurity guy. And he said that the 2020 election was the safest, most secure election we've ever had. And that's true, as every court has pretty much endorsed. Every court, and they've all rejected the phony claims of election fraud. So, there's always going to be, the monsters under every bed for those who are paranoid politically. But, we do have, I think, safe and secure elections because we are vigilant. We take this really seriously. I think a bigger problem is the rhetoric out there that makes people believe that all elections are fraudulent. I think that right now
is dangerous.
That's dangerous. Yeah, because you can't just believe in democracy when you win. And there are a lot of people out there, and sadly, they're really on one side of the aisle. Sorry, I'm not both siding this one, who believe that the election of 2020 was stolen. They're wrong. They're just wrong. They've been proven wrong. You can talk to Chris Krebs.
I heard you had Dave. I heard you had votes in your cookie jar at home.
Yeah, right.
True? Oh, they're right.
The problem is that for those who push these lies, they end up losing badly in court and end up like Rudy Giuliani in bankruptcy. And now you have Carrie Lake who spread these lies, and now she's not going to fight the lawsuit anymore because she knows if she fights it, she's got to go to discovery and it's going to humiliate her. You have a group called True the Vote in Georgia that perpetuated election fraud, and when they were put to the test in court, they admitted, no, we don't have anything. They said, we have all these individuals who want to remain anonymous. And then when the court put them under oath, and they said, you have to come clean with it. They said, actually, we don't have anyone. No one.
Yeah.
So, that I worry about that more than I worry about the malicious foreign actors. So look, I'm not minimizing the potential there, but we are on guard for there. But when it comes to hearts and minds, that has spread like wildfire. It's much easier to perpetuate a lie than to establish the truth. The truth takes a while to be ingrained, but a lie can spread like wildfire.
There's a couple things I wanted to say. First of all, look, I just wanted to make a statement. 64 countries are having democratic elections this year, right? Leading to a year with the highest volume of voters heading to the polls. This is a big year in many ways, but also, represents a big opportunity for bad actors trying to illegally sway votes. And, we're in the Wild West. This is uncharted waters. And as technology advances, so does sophistication of hacking attacks. So look, I was really excited. I called you, guy. I think before we were even set up for the podcast, and I said, Dave, how many times I messaged him, like, come on, man, you're going to come on. We're going to do this. I was so excited. Number one, because I have so much respect for you and, admiration for you. And number two, because I knew that you would get me back to that Fred Menachem and loosened up again. So, we got both done, but thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us and talking about where law and cybersecurity meet. It's been amazing. I hope really that, and we're going to build an audience, man, that our listeners walk away with a deeper understanding of why cybersecurity matters and how important it is to empower our law enforcement and legal system to catch bad actors. And I just want to say, if you had one final thing you wanted to leave our audience thinking about, what would it be, man?
Oh, it's the pool at the Biltmore. I mean, with it's a rectangle and square that goes all around.
Right. Okay.
I do think that we need to take our democracy seriously and never for granted because we've grown up in it. We've been taught it in our civics classes, and just take it for granted, and it should never be taken for granted. It could be lost pretty quickly, and right now it just feels like we're the frog in the boiling water. The water doesn't boil right away and just gets hotter and hotter, and the frog doesn't know he's being boiled to death until too late. And it's just important that wherever we stand politically, really look at the future of our democracy and the spread of misinformation and do what you can to stop it. And when you see a candidate or those people out there who are spreading misinformation, it's our American duty to correct it and to fight it, because it's a democracy. If you can keep it, there's nothing to say that it's going to remain past this election.
That's right. And listen, God bless this great country. I want to say thank you. And I also want to say, I really think, by the way, Dave, look, you see the two of us together. I think we got something going on, man. There's a future for Fred Menachem Aronberg, the Menachem Aronberg show. So just to put it out there, he's got that uncomfortable look.
No, man, you're great. Hey,
okay.
I love Freddie. You're a great host and a great guy, and look forward to returning with you soon, man.
I can't wait. So for those of you, thanks again, Dave. You've been listening to Net Impact, brought to you by ThriveDX and hosted by Fred Menachem. Thanks again, Dave Aronberg. Love you a lot, man. So glad to have you, and I'll see you soon, brother. We'll be in touch.
Brother. Take care.
Today's podcast is brought to you by ThriveDX, the global leader in cybersecurity training. Now, are you interested in learning more about becoming a cybersecurity professional or how to better secure the future of your organization? Visit thrivedx.com for more details, and make sure you follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter, for updates, info, and more. And before we go, I want to thank everyone who helped make this possible. My dynamic executive producer, Michael Seth Prell, our producer and publicist, Carrie Ann Hilton. The design and original music was done by Gilly Fox, Ksenia Aron, and Moro Hana. Our editors, Modi Nachum and Amit Zach. Our advisor, Yoni Neiman, and our manager, Leora Zeri. And the entire operation was overseen by Eugenio Robino Writer at ThriveDX. Thanks to this incredible team. Thanks everyone for joining us. This is Fred Menachem. 0 to 60 and nothing in between. We'll see you in the next episode.